My name's Ted Briggs. I worked as a game warden in Caledonia County, Vermont, for nearly 27 years before retiring 2 summers ago. These days, I mostly help with trail maintenance and check on hunters who still think the old logging roads belong to them. I've spent most of my life in these woods, and I thought I knew every animal that walked, crawled, or slithered through them. But last October, just before the first snow, I came across something that didn't belong. Something that's still got me checking the tree line every time I go out after dark. That day I was up near Groton State Forest, following an old skid trail the crews hadn't used since the 80s. The air was cold and still, with fog hanging low in the hollows. I'd gone out to check for illegal bear baiting sites. Some kids had been bragging online about setting one up past the power line cut. Nothing unusual until I noticed a set of prints in the mud, right where the track dipped near a drainage ditch. At first, I figured they were human, boot prints maybe. But as I looked closer, I realized something was off. The impressions were long, narrow, and deeply pressed into the soil, as if whoever or whatever made them weighed a couple of 100 pounds easily. There were 5 clear digits, each ending in a deep groove like a claw or thick nail had dug in. The stride was wrong too, longer than a man's, but the weight shifted forward, almost like someone walking on the balls of their feet. It's not easy to make me uneasy, but those prints did it. They looked halfway between a man's and something canine. My first thought was maybe a bear with a bad paw, or even someone out there barefoot, fooling around. But it was October, with temperatures at 40 degrees, and the ground was cold enough to crust overnight. No one was walking barefoot that far into the woods. I followed the prints for maybe half a mile. They cut straight through dense undergrowth, not weaving around brush the way people do. Every so often, I'd see broken ferns, scuffed bark, or deep indentations where it had pushed off. Whatever made them wasn't running, but it wasn't wandering either. It was moving with purpose, steady and direct. I carried my Smith & Wesson 450645 ACP, as I always do, though in Vermont, that's mostly for putting down injured deer. Still, I found myself resting my hand on it without thinking. The woods in that area were dead quiet. No chickadees, no squirrels, not even a breeze through the leaves. That silence gets to you, especially when you're familiar with the woods. It's not supposed to be that quiet. It's just not natural. Around 4 in the afternoon, I reached an old hunting cabin, the kind with a rusted chimney and a roof half caved in. The prints didn't just pass by. It looked like whoever or whatever made them had circled the structure several times. They accumulated near the windows, especially the broken one on the north side, and clustered around the door, as if someone had stood there for a while, examining the place up close. The impressions were deeper there, suggesting they had paused, maybe even pressed up against the wood. Then the tracks continued on, leading down toward a marshy clearing. I crouched at the edge and raised my binoculars, scanning for movement. The light was fading, and at first I wasn't sure what I was looking at. Through a mess of scrub and young spruce, I caught sight of a dark shape, broad across the shoulders and standing unnaturally still. It was partially obscured by brush and low branches, just enough to make it hard to tell where the forest ended and the figure began. I could see the upper half upright, wide, almost hunched, motionless like it was frozen mid-step. It took a few seconds of squinting before I was sure it wasn't a trick of the fading light. Whatever it was real, and it was watching the clearing around the cabin. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to close the distance. I moved slowly, avoiding dry branches, trying not to draw attention to myself as I approached by about 20 yards. That gave me a clearer view. Still not perfect, but enough to confirm it wasn't a person, not even close. Then something shifted. Maybe the angle of light, maybe the way it straightened slightly, and everything locked into place. I saw it, fully saw it. Broad chest covered in dense, dark fur. Arms too long for any human, ending in wide, thick hands that looked more like paws with articulated fingers. Its neck was short, muscles corded like rope under the skin, and the head, Jesus. The muzzle jutted forward slightly, just enough to make my brain reject it. The eyes caught what little light was left, and for a half-second, they glowed a dull, yellow hue. I froze completely. My knees almost buckled, and I had to swallow hard to keep from pissing myself right then and there. My mouth went dry. This wasn't an animal, not in any sense I understand. It was something in between man and beast, a grotesque fusion of the two, an abomination in the worst possible way. It stood upright like a man, but every part of its body was twisted toward one purpose: to hunt and kill. I saw its hands, if you could call them that, long-fingered, tipped with thick, curved claws like butcher hooks. Its mouth hung slightly open, revealing rows of jagged canine teeth built for penetrating and tearing flesh. The shape of its chest, the thickness of its limbs, the way it shifted its weight with quiet precision. Every inch of it was engineered for one thing: brutal, up-close violence. Compared to this thing, a full-grown black bear looked like a teddy bear left out in the rain. This wasn't just stronger. It was smarter, leaner, faster, built like a weapon and fine-tuned by something far crueler than nature. It was a goddamn apex predator. And the worst part? There was intelligence behind its movements. It wasn't some mindless brute acting on instinct. I watched as it used its clawed hands to sift through leaves and dirt, then brought them up toward its snout, sniffing, analyzing. It was methodical, calculated. I thought back to the footprints around the cabin, the way they clustered at the windows and the door. This thing had been inspecting the place, not out of curiosity, but with intent. And the way it went about it, the way it examined its surroundings, told me something that turned my stomach to ice. It might be as intelligent as a person, maybe even more so. The realization hit me like a blow to the chest. This thing hadn't stumbled across the cabin by chance. It had been looking for people, hunting them, and now I stood right in front of it. That thought, cold, sharp, and undeniable, terrified me more than anything else. I had never, not once in all my years out there, felt like prey before that moment. My pulse was slamming in my ears, and I suddenly had the overwhelming urge to run. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn and bolt back through the woods, to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, knees locked, muscles taut like piano wire. I was trapped between instinct and terror. And then the creature's head turned, just slightly, but it was enough. It stopped moving in an instant, like someone had flipped a switch. 1 second, it was sifting through the dirt. The next, it was motionless, its eyes locked on me through the brush. It didn't blink, didn't twitch, just stared, the way a mountain lion sizes up a wounded deer. I felt its gaze like a weight pressing down on my chest. There was no more doubt. It knew I was there. It stood taller then, straightening in one smooth motion. The shoulders rolled back, and I realized how massive it really was. Well over 7 feet, maybe 8, muscular but lean, built like a man who's done hard labor his whole life. Then it made a sound, a low, rumbling growl that didn't echo so much as vibrate in my chest. It wasn't loud, but I felt it, even from 50 yards away. That was enough for me. I took 1 step back, snapped a stick under my boot, and the thing responded instantly. It dropped to all fours, not clumsy like a man pretending to be an animal, but smooth, natural. Its movements were frighteningly fast for something that size. I didn't wait to see what came next, but the creature had already decided. With a sudden burst of motion, it lunged forward on all fours, covering ground in huge, loping leaps that seemed to defy physics. The sound of its limbs pounding against the forest floor was like someone slamming wet logs into the dirt. Fast, heavy, terrifying. I fumbled for my gun, hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped it as I yanked it from the holster. I barely managed to get it up in time before I started firing. No aiming, no thinking, just pure panic. I emptied the entire magazine in a frantic scream, the shots cracking through the trees as I stumbled backward. I don't know if I hit it. Maybe, maybe not. But just as fast as it had charged, it veered off, disappearing into the underbrush to my right, with a crashing blur of movement and snapping branches. 1 second, it was bearing down on me. The next, it was gone. Gone, but not forgotten. That thing could have torn me apart if it had kept coming. No way in hell would I have been able to reload fast enough to stop it. But I think it knew that the gun could have killed it. I think it recognized the sound, or the sting of a near miss. It was smart enough to understand firearms, or at least grasp that they meant danger. That's probably the only reason it broke off its attack. The moment it disappeared into the underbrush, I loaded the spare magazine with clumsy, shaking fingers, eyes locked on the tree line the whole time. I kept the pistol raised, barely blinking, waiting for it to come back. It didn't, not visually, but then I heard it. A low, drawn-out growl from deep inside the brush, almost like a warning rumble rolling through the trees. It didn't show itself again. It didn't have to. That growl wasn't the sound of something hunting. It was territorial. It was telling me get out, and I got the message. I wasn't dealing with a mindless animal. I was dealing with something that weighed its choices, something that understood risk. It didn't attack because I was armed, but it still wanted me gone. That growl was meant to make sure I didn't change my mind. And believe me, I had no intention of risking another confrontation with that thing. Not then. Not ever. I turned and hauled ass out of there, stumbling at first, then picking up speed. My heart was thudding so loud I could barely hear my own footfalls. I kept glancing back, expecting it to be right behind me, but there was nothing, just the woods, dead quiet and heavy, like they were holding their breath. Every cracked twig or shift in the shadows made me flinch. My hands were still trembling, clutching the pistol. No way was I going to put that thing away before I was back in my truck. By the time I reached my old Chevy, the light was almost gone. I half expected to see it watching from the tree line, but there was nothing, and the usual noises of the forest had returned. I drove straight back to the ranger station and sat in the parking lot for about 10 minutes, trying to decide whether I should even report it. I didn't. What would I say? That I'd seen something on 2 legs that moved like a wolf and looked like a man? They'd have sent me home for rest and evaluation. Instead, I wrote it up as evidence of bear activity near the cabin and left out the details. For weeks after, I tried to convince myself I'd misjudged what I saw. Maybe it was a poacher in a heavy coat, or a black bear mid-stride, or even a trick of low light and nerves. However, the local paper then ran a brief article about unusual livestock losses all across the county. No signs of coyotes, no drag marks, just clean kills, quick, quiet, and precise. The most nutritious parts, the organs, the soft tissue around the belly, had been carefully removed and, from what I gathered, carried away. Not scattered, not chewed on in place like you'd expect with any normal predator. It was surgical, intentional, like something had harvested what it needed and vanished. The bastard seemed to be just as smart as I feared. There weren't any reports of attacks on people after my encounter, not even from that particular cabin. No missing hikers, no campers dragged off into the night. On paper, everything stayed quiet. But I have a hard time believing that thing would spare humans entirely. More likely, it's just smart enough not to make a mess. Or maybe someone else is cleaning up after it, covering its tracks, keeping the story from spreading. The more I piece together, its behavior, its anatomy, its restraint, the less it feels like a freak of nature. That kind of creature doesn't evolve naturally and then remains hidden from science for centuries. And the truth I keep circling back to, whether I like it or not, is this. I don't think nature made that thing. I think people did. You can call it whatever you want. A mutant, a cryptid, a leftover from some lab experiment that went wrong. All I know is that it's real, and it's still out there somewhere in Caledonia County, stalking the woods and fields at night. My name's Claire. I'm 26 years old, and I run a small dairy operation southeast of Hardwick, Vermont, on the edge of a ridgeline that backs into state forest. My family's been on this land for 3 generations. We don't make a fortune, but we've kept the herd healthy and the milk flowing. I handle most of it myself these days, 36 head of Holsteins, and only hire part-time help during calving season. It's quiet work, honest work, and it used to be predictable. That changed in late spring last year, when one of my cows turned up dead in the south pasture. I found her at first light. She was a 4-year-old, healthy, no signs of bloat or lameness, and still warm to the touch. At first glance, I thought maybe she'd panicked and somehow injured herself, but as I got closer, I saw that wasn't the case. The real reason for her death stared me right in the face the moment I laid eyes on her throat. There was a bite mark, a large one. Deep impressions from thick, widely spaced canines sunk straight into the windpipe. But that wasn't all. There were also claw marks scored into the hide around her neck and shoulders. Deep parallel lines where something had gripped her, hard. They weren't scratches or incidental swipes. They were anchor points. Whatever had bitten her had also used its paws to hold on. That level of coordination, of strength, sent a shiver of unease crawling up my spine. This wasn't some coyote or feral dog. This cow had been taken down by something big. A black bear was the obvious candidate. But that theory didn't hold up long. The cow's belly had been opened. There were bite and claw marks around the midsection. Not a total mess, but enough to suggest something had fed on the carcass. The hide was torn in a few places, and strips of flesh had been ripped back, but not like what you'd expect from a bear mauling. No signs of random chewing, no crushing of the ribs, no tugged limbs. The wounds weren't ragged enough for that. What really stopped me cold was the manner in which the poor thing had been slashed open. Broad, deep, and disturbingly smooth. A cut ran from just behind her forelimbs all the way back to her hip. It didn't look natural. The edges were so clean they almost had a surgical look to them, like someone had gone in with a blade and deliberately opened her up with practiced hands. But given the bite marks, none of it made any sense. The pattern of the cuts didn't match any animal I could think of. It was like two different things had happened. One wild and violent, the other cold and methodical. A person, on the other hand, couldn't have left or even faked bite marks like that. I could feel something cold settling in my gut as I leaned down and took in the details. The cavity was hollow. The organs, heart, liver, lungs, were missing, completely gone. There were a few claw marks across the rib cage, but still no mess, no viscera, no blood trail. It was as if something had reached in with purpose, taken exactly what it needed, and left the rest untouched. Like it knew exactly what it was doing. It came in quietly, took what it wanted, and then vanished. There weren't any clear tracks to follow. The grass in that section was about knee-high, tall, and dense enough to obscure any disturbances. I combed the area in circles, checking for anything that could shed light on the creature that had done this. Nothing. No drag marks, no prints, only flattened grass around the body. Whatever had done this had moved with incredible care. That only made it worse. The more I looked, the more I realized how easily it had come and gone without a trace. I notified the sheriff's office and the local rangers that same morning. They came out later that day to have a look. 2 deputies, one of the forest wardens, and a district game warden from Fish and Wildlife. They circled the cow in silence, took a few photos, and traded glances that told me they didn't like what they were seeing. One of them finally admitted the bite marks were too large for any mountain lion or black bear. The claw marks were even worse, too wide and too deep. The game warden crouched next to the body, measuring the distance between the punctures with his fingers, then stood up and said, half joking, "Well, if it was a bear, it'd have to be a damn monster, bigger than anything I've ever seen around here." That's when someone tossed out the idea of a grizzly. Maybe it escaped from a roadside attraction, a private zoo, or someone's illegal exotic setup. Maybe it wandered here from out west. I could hear the doubt in their voices, but they all latched onto it anyway. It was just believable enough to write down, just weird enough to let them close the case and move on. But I wasn't buying it, not for a second. The idea was absurd, and we all knew it. There hasn't been a confirmed grizzly in this part of the country, ever. But they clung to it like a life raft, just enough to explain the impossible without having to chase it further. I kept nodding, but inside I was fuming. These so-called professionals were just as clueless as I was, maybe even more so. Only difference was that they had uniforms and badges to hide behind. But there was more. I could feel the condescension in their voices. To them, I was just a dumb, young girl in over her head, freaking out over her first livestock death. The truth was right there in front of us, bleeding into the grass, and none of them wanted to admit what it meant. There was something on the loose out there, something very large and very dangerous. Not a bear, not a mountain lion, something worse, something that didn't fit into any of their tidy categories or field guides, and they knew it. But all they did was make up bullshit, hoping the problem would just move on or somehow solve itself. In the end, they told me to keep my eyes open, maybe stay armed, maybe keep watch at night. They also advised that I get rid of the carcass immediately to avoid attracting more predators to the property. That part stuck with me longer than the rest, because as I stood there listening to them talk around the problem, a thought crept into my mind and rooted itself there. What if I didn't get rid of it and used it as bait instead? Predators don't usually pass up an easy meal. Not when they've already done the hard part. Maybe, just maybe, whatever had killed the cow would come back for more if given the chance. Maybe it was still watching from the trees, waiting for its chance. I didn't say it out loud, just nodded along and kept the idea to myself. If it did return, I would probably gain some clarity, see exactly what I was dealing with. And if I got lucky, maybe I could even shoot it. Take it out from a distance, clean and quick, with the hunting rifle my dad had left me when he died 2 years ago. The rifle was a Christensen Arms Ridgeline, bolt action, chambered in .308 Winchester, topped with a loopholed Mark V HD scope and an aftermarket digital night vision clip-on. My father, God bless his soul, had been an avid hunter his whole life. I never cared much for it myself, and I always thought the rifle and scope were overkill. Hell, I used to joke that he spent more money on that thing than some people do on their trucks. But now I was thankful he'd been the kind of man who didn't compromise when it came to his passion. The setup could do some real accurate damage at 500 yards if I did my part. I'd done enough range time with my dad to consider myself a decent shot. And in that moment, the rifle was the only thing I had to deal with whatever the hell was creeping around my animals. Whatever this thing was, it would take care of it, no matter how terrifying its teeth or claws. If I could get a shot, I could kill it and end the threat right then and there. As luck would have it, the carcass was lying on flat ground at the far edge of the south pasture, well within line of sight from the second-floor bedroom of my old farmhouse. I'd stood at that window 100 times, drinking coffee, watching the herd graze. It was elevated, impossible for the creature to reach, and gave me a perfect view across half the property. It was the ideal vantage point. I made my preparations before dusk. First, I drove the rest of the cows into the barn and locked them in tight. Didn't want the thing getting distracted and picking off another live one instead of going for the bait I'd left out. Then I gathered everything I'd need. Rifle, plenty of ammo, and a flashlight. Set up a padded rest at the windowsill, drew the curtains just right so I could see without being seen, and brewed a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. If it came back tonight, I wouldn't be caught off guard. I'd be waiting. Hours passed. Rain rolled in after midnight, a soft, steady drizzle that drummed gently on the roof and left a sheen of moisture across the pasture. I watched the tree line through the scope until my eyes stung, dozed off for short spells with the rifle across my lap, and jolted awake at every gust of wind. The coffee helped, as did the tension, but I just wasn't accustomed to staying up all night. It was just after 3:30 a.m. when I finally caught sight of something. At first I thought it was my imagination, a shifting shape at the edge of the woods, barely distinguishable from the dense undergrowth. But then it moved. Something felt wrong immediately. The shape was too upright. It was walking on 2 legs, not fully upright like a person, but hunched low, almost in a crouch, like it was trying to make itself smaller and harder to see. The way it crept forward was cautious, almost surgical, silent, deliberate. It didn't lope or prowl like a 4-legged predator. It moved more like a person than an animal. I kept my scope on it, heart hammering. It stopped just beyond the barbed wire fence and crouched lower still, scanning the pasture in slow, methodical arcs. It didn't rush. It didn't charge. It waited. When it stepped into the open, I forgot to breathe. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall if it stood fully upright, but it moved hunched, on the balls of its clawed feet, long arms swaying like a gorilla's. The rain clung to its dark fur, making the thick musculature underneath ripple with every step. Its shoulders were broad and impossibly dense. The arms were too long, the legs bent backwards, and every inch of it looked built for raw power and speed. The head was the stuff of nightmares, wolf-like, but wrong, broader, more expressive. A long, squared muzzle filled with teeth that looked like they could crush bone in a single bite. Its lips curled back slightly as it sniffed the air, revealing more of those teeth, and then the eyes. They caught the weak ambient light through the scope, faintly reflective, scanning the field with measured intelligence. It moved with caution, always keeping cover nearby, ducking behind fence posts, weaving between water troughs and old equipment. It was a predator, no doubt about it, but not the reckless kind. This thing was smart. It wasn't just moving on instinct. It was thinking its way across my field. I should have raised the rifle, should have lined up the shot right then and there, but I didn't. I was frozen, not with fear exactly, but awe, fascination. I'd never seen anything like it. No animal on this continent moved like that. No predator that size crept with such purpose and control. My mind tried to rationalize it, to make sense of what I was seeing. But somewhere deep in the part of me that doesn't ask permission, that just knows, I recognized it for what it was, a werewolf. Not in the fairy tale sense, not the full moon silver bullet kind, but a living, breathing monster that had somehow stepped out of myth and into my pasture. I didn't want to believe it. I'd never believed in any of that supernatural bullshit. But there it was, right in front of me, real, solid, and terrifying. My conscious mind fought it, shoved it down, called it something else. But some primal part of me had already decided. It reached the carcass and knelt beside it with fluid ease. One long arm stretched forward and slid into the cow's opened belly, rummaging with a slow, almost surgical motion. It wasn't feeding the way a bear would. There was no frenzy, no tearing. It was searching, selecting. Finally, the spell broke. I drew in a sharp breath, re-shouldered the rifle, and settled the crosshairs just below its short, pointy ear. Despite its careful, methodical approach, the thing was completely oblivious to me. It had no idea I was there, watching it from above, from a place it clearly hadn't considered a threat. It moved with the confidence of an apex predator. That was its mistake. My hands were trembling. Yes, but not from doubt. It was adrenaline, cold and raw in my bloodstream. I took one last breath, held it, and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the window like a thunderclap. The werewolf flinched hard and toppled sideways, collapsing into the wet grass with a heavy, twisting sprawl. It let out a loud, moaning cry. Not quite human, not quite animal. Its movements were frantic and jerky. It had definitely suffered some serious damage. One of its clawed hands shot up to the side of its head, where I thought I saw a patch of fluid soaking through the fur where its ear used to be. It thrashed violently, rolling onto its side, claws digging into the wet earth as it tried to find its footing again. But it couldn't get up. I fired a second shot, this time aiming center mass. No time to line up anything clean. I just squeezed the trigger and hoped it hit something vital. The round struck home. The werewolf jerked and let out a sharp, screeching cry that made my skin crawl. It buckled but kept moving, rolling sideways with its long limbs flailing for purchase. It still wasn't done, though, so I fired one more time. This one hit somewhere low in the back, and the effect was immediate. It collapsed fully like a dropped sack of meat, limbs spasming once more, then nothing. I stayed awake until dawn, rifle on my lap, the window wide open to the drizzle and the cold. I didn't see the thing move again. No twitching, no sound. As much as I told myself it was dead, the truth was, I wasn't ready to get any closer. What I'd seen had shaken me to the core. That thing wasn't supposed to exist, And if one of them did, who's to say there weren't more? The idea of stepping outside, vulnerable and alone in the dark, felt like suicide. So I waited, because until the sun came up, I couldn't trust anything. Not my eyes, not the silence, and definitely not the idea that the nightmare outside was over. I kept looking at the lifeless shape through the scope every few minutes, expecting it to somehow rise again and come for me. My hands never fully left the rifle. As the sky started to gray and the first hint of light touched the treetops, I couldn't stand the wait any longer. I needed to know. I needed to be sure that what I'd seen last night was real, that it wasn't just something my mind had conjured in the dark, spun out of adrenaline and fear. I needed to see it up close, to look it in the face and confirm that it was actually there, actually dead. So I pulled on my boots, grabbed the rifle, and stepped outside into the heavy morning mist. The air was still, the world hushed, as if holding its breath. I made my way slowly across the damp grass toward the place where the thing had fallen, heart thudding with every step. It was lying face down in the grass, its body twisted at a grotesque angle. The side of its skull was torn open where the first bullet had gone in. Blood pooled beneath it, staining the dense grass. Even in daylight, my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. It looked like something out of a nightmare, more beast than man, but definitely not a normal animal. Thick, scarred, leathery hide, patchy fur, long clawed fingers, that squared-off muzzle full of cracked, yellow teeth. It was dead. I was sure of it. I stood there for nearly 5 minutes, watching, waiting for it to move. It didn't. Up close, I could finally see where the second and third shots had landed. The second round had punched through the upper right corner of its chest and likely tore through something important based on the angle and the exit wound I found near the ribs. The third had hit the lower spine near the hip. The bullet must have hit with enough force to crack the spine or at least damage some of the nerves. It had collapsed instantly, like its legs had been disconnected from the rest of it. The thing was still, lifeless, a collapsed monster lying in my field. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to lower the rifle just yet. Up close, the stench that thing emitted was almost unbearable. Urine, feces, blood, and rotten meat all mingled into a choking wave of decay. I didn't waste time. As soon as I was sure it wasn't getting back up, I walked straight back to the house and called the district game warden, the same one who'd come out after the first kill and floated the grizzly theory. He sounded surprised and said he'd come by later that day to take a look. After the phone call, I finally let myself crash. I was beyond wired, but too exhausted to keep functioning. I curled up on the couch with the rifle propped beside me and dozed off with my boots still on. When I woke up a little before noon, I cleaned myself up, got dressed, and brewed another pot of coffee. I figured the warden would be arriving soon, and I was itching to lay into him for blowing me off the first time. Then there was a knock at the door. I opened it, expecting the same green uniform and wildlife patch. Instead, there was a man standing on my porch in plain black combat gear, holding an assault rifle. No name tag, no insignia, no badge, just a tactical vest, dark boots, and cold eyes. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. It wasn't really a question. I stepped aside, heart racing, and let him in. He didn't waste time. "I'm here about the animal you shot last night. First, let me say thank you. You made our job a lot easier. We've been after that thing for quite a while." I stared at him. What the hell was it? His demeanor shifted just slightly. Less casual now, more measured. "I'm not authorized to share any details." I felt heat rising in my face. "You expect me to just accept that? I killed the damn thing on my own property. You owe me more than that." He shook his head. "You did well. That's all I can tell you. And you should try to move on. Pretend it never happened." "Are there more of them?" I asked. "Out there?" His eyes flicked to mine for a second too long. "No, this was the only one. You're safe now." But his voice lacked conviction. He turned to leave but paused at the door. "Look, even if you told someone, no one's going to believe you. The body is already gone, and the cow's been dealt with too. As far as the world is concerned, Nothing ever happened here. And with that, he stepped outside and disappeared down my driveway without another word. I grabbed my coat and bolted for the field. When I got to the kill site, there was nothing left. No werewolf, no cow, just as the man had said. Just 2 sets of deep vehicle tracks pressed into the wet grass, and a vague chemical smell that was totally out of place. I stood there for a long time, fists clenched, heart hollow. The game warden did show up later that afternoon. Not knowing what else to do, I told him the truth, the whole truth, about the shots, the thing I'd killed, the way it moved and looked, everything. He listened for maybe a minute before cutting me off, said he didn't have time for stories. Without a body, without any evidence, I might as well have been talking about Bigfoot. He gave me a half-hearted lecture about wasting his time, then turned around and left without even walking the field. I didn't blame him, not really, but it still stung. There was nothing I could do except move on. I've been having nightmares ever since. But there's work to be done, cows to feed, fences to fix, so I just keep going, same as always.